Few sectors have been in the eye of the storm, like telecom, and it hasn't been easy for the companies that have invested billions here. For global giant Vodafone, the country's second largest telecom company, things have been particularly bad because apart from the regular problems, it has had others. So a week after the government offered an olive branch of conciliation, I caught up with Vodafone's country head Marten Pieters to find out whether the clouds are indeed lifting.
Yeah, I think what we have seen the last probably few weeks is that there certainly seems to be a lot more awareness that the telecoms industry is not in a very good shape. You might know I've been saying that for a long time, but it took some time before I think that message landed. Maybe they thought that we were just complaining to get better business results or better regulation, but it's a real situation. The situation is that most operators are in trouble. Revenues of the last 3 quarters were stable in the industry. We lost in the last 2 quarters 50 million customers. There are all reasons for it, but it doesn't sound so good. And if you look at the investment levels in India, then they're shockingly low at this moment. We saw a report of one of the investment banks which compared China with India. And in China last year, $55 billion was invested in telecoms infrastructure. In India, that number was 3.
But a lot of people are saying, while the headline news from the government seems positive, the tax department seems to be doing its own thing. And you know, in your case also, even as we speak, this week you've got another tax claim. So on the ground, you know, the big news item of the retrospective tax aside, it's been a tough year and a half for you?
Actually, the last 3 years have been extremely tough from that perspective because we get many tax claims that I'm not talking about the Vodafone tax claim as it is called, I'm talking about operational tax claims. We get many tax claims that we think are unfair, so we fight them in court. We also get lots of penalties from, especially of course, the telecoms department. And I think, well, if I talk to people who are close to the system, then there's a lot of fear in the system. After the 2G scam, I think many people who are sitting in the system in departments as bureaucrats, they are very nervous to take calls which might be interpreted as of doing a favor to a business. The number of claims has been enormous, and I read today in the newspaper that the DOT itself, I think, has also come to the realization that this can't go on because the numbers are really, really big. We got, if you add tax claims and penalties, we're talking about far over 10,000 crores in the last few years. Those are amazing numbers, and it's simply impossible to run the business with those kind of risks.
Pretty much all sectors, and telecom in particular, Marten, has gone through a very, very tough phase. As we've been talking, 3 years has been extremely tough. Do you see the worst over?
Yes, I see that.
Before I get into the spectrum issue, do you see the worst over?
Yeah, I see the worst over.
Are you saying it because it can't get worse than this?
Yeah, I see the worst over. Why do I think that? I think because I see now awareness on the side of the government and the regulator that it's probably gone too far. The pendulum has swung too far to the other end. And I see at least a readiness to look at the facts, to see how we can get it better. I think that's half of the cure. The cure will come. I think the problem was that up to very recently, nobody realized that the problem was as big as it is.
For telecom players like Vodafone, the market has been vicious, regulation tough, and the uncertainty crippling. The result has been that the top brass of most of these companies have spent more time fighting battles than anything else. The biggest one right now is over spectrum, as the original licenses of the incumbents come up for rebidding, raising even more worries.
All the countries who started earlier with telecoms than in India have resolved that in a very friendly way. And I've said that over and over. We realize that where we got the spectrum for 20 years, of course we will have to pay for the spectrum again. But it's a bit funny to do as if you can stop the business after 20 years. So I think the concept that we have in the license is we are entitled to an extension of the license. Extension meaning, yes, you need to discuss, of course, price of spectrum and so on, but you cannot say, okay, thank you for 20 years service, it's over, it's done, we'll look again, maybe there's another guy who can do it better. That's not done in the world because we have invested tens of thousands of crores in networks. We have tens of millions of customers on those networks. It's a running business.
Okay, let's talk about the price of spectrum. I think somewhere the 3G auctions have skewed the concept of price of auctions completely in the business. Is that a price you will pay for the aggressiveness for 3G? Because if we were to look at refarming or rebidding for spectrum, what's the fair price according to you?
I think the 3G spectrum was a very specific spectrum because the word already says that it's 3G. So we started with 2G, then we got 2.5G, then we got 3G. It is the same kind of extension of the same business. So if you don't get that, then actually you not only don't get the upside, but your basic part of your business is really at risk. A few basic mistakes have been made, and again I think it's related to the fear that was in the system after the 2G scam. Actually what they more or less did is take the outcome of the 3G auction as the jumping off point for the next one. Now the 3G auction was very high, so that was anyhow the wrong level. But what they also forgot is that actually the 3G auction started with a reserve price that was much lower. It was not the reserve price that determined the outcome of the 3G auction.
As it is envisaged right now, Marten, you are expected to move to 1800, clear up 900, get an auction of 900, bid for it and move back. Operationally, is that possible?
Everything is possible if you get enough time, but it is a complete disaster. It's a disaster for the customers, it's a disaster for the operators, because we have built networks based on this spectrum that we have, and we have in those places, because we're talking about the metro specifically here, we have millions, tens of millions of customers between these operators. So one is, and that's the position we have taken legally, you simply cannot put spectrum that is in use up for auction. Governments all over the world auction spectrum, but they all over the world auction spectrum that is available, that is not in use, it's new spectrum.
Vodafone says that given that it has so much at stake, as one of the key players in the sector, it will make an aggressive bid to retain what it has, but if the cost is high and unviable, it will hit the sector, which is already reeling under high debt.
Seems to be over 250,000 crores of debt in the telecoms industry now. So serving that debt in itself, at the interest rates that India has, which is let's say on average 10-11%, that's a huge amount of money which flows back into the bank's hands. That means that money cannot be spent on spectrum, that money cannot be spent on improvement of services, that money can also not be spent on capex rolling out networks further. So the whole construct of the industry I think is wrong at this moment. We're working on the one hand for the government, meaning we pay huge sums in license fees and all kind of normal taxes and spectrum usage fees. We as Vodafone paid last year 9,200 crores to the government just as regular payments, and then we have 30,000 crore debt as Vodafone, which means that I pay over 3,000 crores to the bank.
So you see the government really being more reasonable on the refarming
I have
issue.
to count on that.
The industry is counting on that. It is estimated that refarming will cost the telecom industry a lot of money, and many believe it will be a deadly blow to an industry already languishing since 2010, when the infamous 2G scam struck a blow to the sector. So how has all this impacted Vodafone on the ground? We tell you when we return. The telecom sector has been in the throes of change. Everything is fluid here. The future, the spectrum, how much it will cost, and given the debt, how the various companies here will survive. But amidst this, experts believe that there is one silver lining. The fact that after a long time, telecom companies have been able to check the slide in their revenues by hiking rates over the last few months. So is the tide turning?
I think we took the turn, so to say. Now, of course, it's not immediately hallelujah, but because I got some questions when we did our results 2 weeks ago. People said, oh, are we seeing these huge price hikes again? I said, well, I'm not aware of huge price hikes, because if you look at my average revenue per minute, which is for us the measure of more or less our yields, that has been stable for 9 months now. So it's not that we see huge increase in yields, but at least the drop has stopped, and we see that people are now more willing to be reasonable and rational in pricing. What we see is that every customer who is not a data user and moves to be a data user, which can be on 2G, we see an ARPU uplift. Now, if a 2G data user moves to 3G, we see another ARPU uplift. It means that, yes, in the end, it will pay off. And what I said, I need that customer, and I need that spectrum, and I need 3G services in the end, because if I don't have it, I'm sure today it's not too big a problem. 5 years from now, it would be a big issue.
You know, in multiple interviews of yours, you said that the worst is over with the ARPUs. Now, the usage pattern is going to change. We're going to see an uptick. It's almost as though you were seeing an inflection point on the ground. Is there an inflection point?
Yeah, we've seen that. As I said, the what we call average revenues per minute, we've seen the lowest point, so they are turning now towards growth. And we've seen the ARPUs. If you look at the numbers, then we had seen 20 years of drop in ARPUs, but not the last few quarters. And that is actually also because there are less SIMs in the market. This whole number of customers in India is a very fake number in a way, because there's so much multi-simming that we think there's probably not more than 650 million real users. And what we see, for example, half of my customers use very little, because typically what they do, they will only use my SIM for incoming calls. Of course, I get a bit of money from that, MTRs,
but not
they
enough.
don't. So if I can convince a customer then not only to use it for incoming calls but for outgoing calls, it's actually not a new customer, but the usage will be different. That's what we've seen the last, let's say, 2 quarters, that is happening now.
Improving revenues has been a godsend for the telecom players, and it has been a long wait. Vodafone entered India in 2007 when it acquired Hutchison SR for $10.7 billion. Since then, the UK headquartered company has invested $7 billion in expanding its reach, especially deep within India.
We did 2 very big things when we came in. One was we started operations in 7 new circles where Hutch was not in at all. So we became a nationwide operator. That was a big investment. And the second thing we did is we built an enterprise business. The business that was there was pure mobility, and we are now a serious enterprise business, including fixed line services, data services, and so on. In between, of course, in those 5-6 years, also the market exploded. Just to give you a feel, we now have 115,000 towers, sites as we call them, and 90,000 of those were built after Vodafone came in. That's partly because we rolled out in these new areas, but also because there was so much growth that we needed to build new sites all the time to be able to cope with the capacity. So yes, that phase is a bit over. It's not completely over, but it's a bit over. So the next phase will be far more about further extending the enterprise business and 3G, so the data businesses.
You know, Marten, I've always wanted to ask you this. You operate in 30 countries. In India, you have multiple markets. You can't have one market. And I know you have a very decentralized way of running your business. But you have a Manhattan and a sub-Saharan Africa coexisting. So how, as a country head, do you balance these two? How do you, gauge how it's going to grow? How are you planning around it?
I think, in a way, Vodafone India is a small group in the group, in Vodafone Group, because, of course, we are dealing with 22 circles and then several business lines, separate business lines. We just started, as you know, with the mobile money business, M-Pesa. That's a separate business line, like the enterprise business is a separate business line. So it's a pretty complicated model. I think the success in these kind of companies is always to find the right balance between what you decide and do centrally, and then really also what you don't do centrally, because you have to leave it up to the operation. So if you would take Mumbai or Bihar, we run them in theory in the same way. We have the same structure. We have a management team who runs Mumbai. We have processes around Mumbai. It's a separate P&L, and we have the same in Bihar. But I'm not going to tell the guy in Mumbai or in Bihar how to run his business, because of course you need to run it completely differently in those places.
The diversity in the marketplace has forced Vodafone to adopt different strategies, sharing resources like infrastructure in the villages where revenue is low, and pushing high-end applications in urban centers where data is catching up. But technology is also changing fast, and many of its competitors have moved to 4G. So is Vodafone being left behind?
We don't think that it is the right time to start with 4G. Vodafone for sure will do in the future 4G in this country, but it's all about timing. It comes too quick. 4G comes in all the countries you're talking about in Europe and the US 10 years after 3G started. Now 3G started very recently here, and actually due to the fact that, for example, we only have 3G spectrum in half of the country, we haven't even started 3G in many circles. So we first want to develop the 3G system, and then you will see there will be an appetite for 4G.
But as somebody who's worked in the space across markets, a layperson's view is that can you afford not to be with the new wave of technology? Can India leapfrog to 4G by skipping 3G? Are there moments when you question that?
No, absolutely not, because indeed it's just a fundamental issue of timing. It's too early for it. If you look at smartphones that are not able to do 4G, because actually I think today there's only one 4G phone in the market. Even your iPhones and your iPads don't work here because it's different. It's 4G, but it's different frequency bands, different technology. So it's not that simple. There's only one phone in the market that actually could work on the Indian spectrum. Now, if you look at anyhow the propension of things like smartphones, tablets, it's developing now in India, but it's still relatively early. We have seen that last year, I think 33 million smartphones in the system in India. 11 million out of those are on Vodafone's network. Only 1/3 of the people who have a smartphone actually use 3G. So I mean, for us it's a far bigger issue to get all these people to use 3G, because they have a 3G enabled device. They should use it. They have a very expensive smartphone. Even those don't use it. Now we're talking about why are people not using 4G. They're not even using 3G. So it's too early.
The Vodafone is a leader in 4G across the overseas market. Marten believes that he did the right thing, sticking to his belief that India is not quite ready for this new technology. Time will tell whether this bet pays off. For now, there are other issues to grapple with. More on that when we return. Vodafone is India's second largest telecom company, and it has had quite a run in India through the ups and downs in the sector. But given the fact that it is also the second largest MNC with operations across 30 countries, is it even possible to second guess how telecom will evolve here in the Indian market? Marten says that is a tough one.
I think it is in a way never replicable what happened in the past in other countries, although you might go through part of the same curve. But for example, when, let's take 3G again, when that happened 10 years in Europe, you didn't have the iPhone, you didn't have the tablets. So in a way, technology evolves very quickly. That means that we're going through, of course, a learning phase in India in its early days. So I think that India is developing at an incredible speed. And what we now need to see is not only building the connectivity and having the devices there, but I think that there's a big need of applications, specific applications that can help the Indian people with all kinds of issues. You saw maybe that the government is now trying to stimulate e-governance. I think that's a fantastic initiative, but also m-health, education, all these big ticket items, they can really use that technology much more than they do today.
You know, in a sense, telecom was seen as the beacon of light, you know, of things that can go right with India when you allow a market-led force to determine price, growth, etc. But we've seen a step back in the last 3 years, Marten. Has the bandwidth really gone more in trying to figure out the problems rather than find the solutions on the ground?
Well, I think I can only speak for Vodafone, but we have always tried to do both things. You know, we have developed the business, we are focused very much on serving our customers, we've grown the business, we've grown the customer numbers, but at the same time, from a financial perspective, I think for sure we could have done more if we would have had a healthier telecoms market. And I think even overall, if you look at the country level, a lot of capital destruction has happened. You know, 12 operators coming in, 12 operators building networks. The country doesn't need 12 networks. It's simply capital destruction in the end. And you will see that happening while we speak.
For the longest time, we've been asking and talking about consolidation in the business. What is the next phase of consolidation as you see it?
Well, I think a few things need to change if you want to see real consolidation, meaning that at this moment both the M&A rules but also some rules around spectrum and spectrum trading make it virtually impossible to do it. Meaning that, take again the 3G example, I would be willing to buy 3G spectrum, and there might be operators in the market who have bought it and are not financially viable today and would be maybe willing to sell it, but spectrum trading is not allowed. So it's stuck with them. they don't use it, and I would like it, but I can't buy it. I mean, that, in my view, doesn't make much sense on a country-wide level. You know, it's not good for the customer, it's not good for the country. So some of these rules need to become far more flexible, and then you will see dynamics of consolidation happening.
In the case where the spectrum trading rules are relaxed, are opened up, what would Vodafone's stance be?
If we look at our current spectrum in India, where we have by far in the Vodafone group the most customers, we have on an average 8 megahertz of spectrum. All other Vodafone opcos, even in countries where they have only 3 million customers, like in 3 million people in New Zealand or Ireland, those kind of countries, you typically have 20 megahertz of spectrum. That's kind of the average in the Vodafone group is 22 megahertz. So we would be willing to buy more spectrum, which would make the quality of the service much better. You would see less dropped calls, you would get a better voice quality. So it's good for the customer, it's good for us, and it will actually also be good for the government because they get the money for the spectrum. Yes, we are willing to invest in spectrum, but it needs to be at reasonable prices, otherwise we simply cannot make the business case work.
The telecom sector in India has come a long way from once being the torchbearer of change to becoming a scam-ridden mess. So given this and the problems Vodafone has faced on the ground, how are its investors viewing its tryst with India?
There's two levels of investors. You can say our direct shareholder, but that's actually us, you know, that is very close to us. It's part of course, the company itself. But if you look at the investors who have invested in Vodafone Group, I meet a lot of them, and 4 years ago they would be extremely critical about India, not so much about the regulation, but more like, is this ever going to work for Vodafone? Can Vodafone ever compete in a market like that? Now it's the opposite. They don't talk about the operations anymore. I went to a few investor conferences in the beginning of this year, and the discussion is no longer on Vodafone India. They're all very happy with that. The only worry now is about regulation and spectrum pricing.
Which is a bigger worry?
And, well, you should ask them. My life has become much easier because they're no longer grilling me on the operational
and you can pass
review.
the regulatory issues to the government and the main parent.
Well, what I've seen, to be honest, is that some of them shake their head and walk out of the room like they've given up to try to understand it, because a lot of what has happened here the last 3 years was actually pretty, you could say, difficult to understand for someone from the outside system, which included like cancellation of so many licenses, which was a complete surprise in the system, of course. I mean, for a foreign investor, that's difficult to understand.
Is this the toughest market that you've operated in?
Yes, it has been the toughest market. I cannot deny that.
Has it been an enjoyable process?
Absolutely. You see, I'm still smiling. I enjoy it a lot.
The next few years will be challenging for all the players in the industry. What will pay is deep pockets and the patience to be able to look beyond into the horizon, which looks spectacular no matter how tough the road to it is going to be.